Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Dimalsha. 2 years ago, I arrived here from Sri Lanka, not knowing a single person, holding only the belief that God had a purpose in my life. Standing here today, I can say this journey has shown me His hand at work in ways I couldn't have imagined. Let me take you back to where it all started. I grew up as a second-generation Christian, led by my strong, faithful mother. She would gather our family every day for an hour of prayer, a routine I often dreaded as a child. Like clockwork, we went through these churchy things, and me serving, praying, going to church, without truly knowing God. Over time, as life went on, I felt distant, merely going through the motions. I started to question if Jesus was even real. Did He care about me? But despite my doubts, I couldn't ignore the sense that this world, so beautiful and intricate, had to have a creator. Deep down, I knew God was there, but I was stuck, drifting without real faith. So I stepped down from serving and continued to pray for a change, a new beginning. I had a comfortable life in Sri Lanka, a good job, loving parents, and a very supportive community. However, as I earnestly sought God's will, He stirred a desire in my heart to leave these familiar comforts behind and pursue work in Singapore. Everything changed in 2022 when I came to Singapore with my family expecting only a 1-month vacation. During that month, I felt a closeness to Him I hadn't felt before and a real desire to know His purpose for my life. Even though I had stability back home, God was calling me to something bigger. My mom has always believed that vacations are no excuse for skipping church as a family on Sundays. So we started looking for a church to attend within the month we were here. At that point, I was desperately looking for a miracle in my life. So I typed, "Miracle Services in Singapore" into my search bar, and Lighthouse Evangelism appeared. It was our first time attending a service here. I walked in as a tourist, but I left as someone whose life had begun to change. Walking into Lighthouse Evangelism, God renewed and reignited my hope and faith in Him. Even as I faced interview after interview with no success within that month, I still had the crazy faith to believe that God could do the impossible. Finally, on the very last day before flying back, I had one more interview. I went, prayed, and hoped, but flew back home with no response. Yet, I kept my faith, knowing nothing is impossible with God. Just 2 days later, I received an offer from that last company. Amazingly, I learned my boss had been searching for someone for 6 months, and the position didn't even exist before. I couldn't deny that God was moving in my life. Moving here wasn't easy. I struggled with homesickness, loneliness, and anxiety. Maybe some of you would have expected things to fall into place very quickly, but it was hard. However, God gave me a family in a new way through my cell group at church. They became my support, my home away from home. I began working at my first job in Singapore, grateful to have found it. I stayed faithful in this role for several months, but I eventually felt it was time to move forward, hoping for God to open better prospects. I began applying elsewhere, putting in my best effort and praying for God's guidance, but every door seemed to remain closed. During that season, I felt God's voice in my heart through the verse from Isaiah chapter 60, verse 22. "When the time is right, I, the Lord, will make it happen." Holding on to that promise, I chose to trust His timing and stayed in my role for 1.5 years. Then, earlier this year, things took an unexpected turn. My boss called me one Friday, saying it was my last day. I was being retrenched. The shock and worry were overwhelming, especially with only a month to find a new job or return to Sri Lanka. But God had already gone ahead of me. Instead of making me sign the papers and lose everything immediately, my CEO did something I hadn't expected. With a stroke of God's mercy, a title I had long desired was finally granted to me that day. This new title became a stepping stone, opening doors to a path that God had already prepared for me. As if that weren't enough, my CEO extended my payroll for 3 more months, giving me time to secure another position. This wasn't luck. It was truly God's hand at work. In those months of waiting, I had no hope but God. During a church service in February, I rededicated my life, telling Him, if bringing me here was a life lesson, and it's your will now to send me back to Sri Lanka, I accept it. I surrender myself fully to your plans. Almost 2 months after being retrenched, God provided a better job and a renewed sense of purpose. He took what was meant to break me and turned it for good. His grace carried me through. God uses every situation in our lives according to His timing to glorify Himself. Through it all, I've drawn closer to God. I've tasted and seen that the Lord is good, as the psalmist says in Psalm chapter 34, verse 8, and I found refuge in Him. Even when everything seemed to fall apart, God showed me His goodness. Today, I stand in Lighthouse Evangelism, not as a tourist, but as someone who's committed to serving in His house, particularly in the service coordination ministry. Being part of this community allows me to see God working in amazing ways, and it fuels my desire to help others experience His goodness. Let me end with these lyrics. You can have all this world, but give me Jesus. That's all I want, and my prayer is that you too may find that peace and assurance in Him. Thank you.